The Hoop Heads Podcast is brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
Hey Hoopheads! Wanted to take a minute to shout out our partners and friends at Dr. Dish Basketball. Their Dr. Dish shooting machines are undoubtedly the most advanced and user-friendly machines on the market, and they truly accelerate skill development faster than ever. Learn more at drdishbasketball.com and follow their incredible content at Dr. Dish B-Ball on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Mention the Hoopheads Podcast and save an extra $300 on the Dr. Dish Rebel, All-Star, and CT models. Also, make sure to check out the new Dr. Dish Home Machine. Visit drdishbasketball.com for details. That's a great deal, Hoopheads. Get your Dr. Dish shooting machine today.
Hi, this is Robbie Lehman, Content Manager at Fast Model Sports, and you're listening to the Hoopheads Podcast.
Prepare like the pros with the all-new Fast Draw and Fast Scout. Fast Draw has been the #1 play diagramming software for coaches for years. You'll quickly see why Fast Model Sports has the most compelling and intuitive basketball software out there. For a limited time, Fast Model is offering new subscribers 10% off Fast Draw and Fast Scout. Just use the code SAVE10 at checkout to grab your discount, and you'll be on your way to more efficient game prep and improved communication with your team. Fast Model also has new coaching content every week on its blog, plus play and drill diagrams on its play bank. Check out the links in the show notes for more. Fast Model Sports is the best in basketball.
Coaches, do you have a point guard or leader you're going to be counting on next season to run the show for you? Don't leave next season to chance. Thousands of coaches send their players to a point guard college camp each summer to learn to think the game, lead a team, and run the show. Your players will be smarter, better leaders, and better equipped to foster a championship culture next season in practice and in your locker room. I've seen firsthand how PGC camps have had a huge impact on players and coaches that I know, both on and off the court. You can go to pgcbasketball.com to find a 5-day, 4-night camp near you. That's pgcbasketball.com.
Committing to the college, that's the easy part. Getting recruited is easy. You get to have fun. You're on the phone. You're doing, and the same thing with the AAU thing. You see all the stuff that they get and all of the stuff where they play and all of that. That's easy. The hard part is the work that goes into getting that. And we talk about that all the time with our guys.
Rob Brost has been the head boys basketball coach at Bolingbrook High School for the past 14 seasons. He's the school's all-time winningest coach and has won nearly 80% of his games at Bolingbrook. His program is generally recognized as one of the best in the state of Illinois, having won 22-plus games in 8 of the past 9 seasons, while advancing to the state Final Four twice. Bolingbrook has produced over 60 college basketball players during Rob's tenure. Coach Brost's teams have led Class 4A, Illinois' biggest class in scoring 3 out of the past 4 seasons. Rob is a regular on the speaking circuit, having presented at USA Basketball Coach Academies, PGC Basketball Clinics, and several state association clinics throughout the country. Rob has served multiple times as a court coach for USA Basketball men's junior national team Minicamps. Brost was also a head and assistant coach at McHenry County College in Crystal Lake, Illinois. He spent 2 seasons at McHenry as an assistant coach and 3 seasons as the head coach. Earlier in his career, Rob spent 7 years from 2001 to 2007 as the manager of basketball operations with the Chicago Bulls Training Academy, heading up all youth programming for the Chicago Bulls. If you're looking to improve your coaching, please consider joining the Hoopheads Mentorship Program. We believe that having a mentor is the best way to maximize your potential and become a transformational coach. By matching you up with one of our experienced mentors, you'll develop a one-on-one relationship that will help your coaching, your team, your program, and your mindset. The Hoopheads Mentorship Program delivers mentoring services to basketball coaches at all levels through our team of experienced head coaches. Find out more at hoopheadspod.com or shoot me an email directly, mike@hoopheadspod.com. Follow us on social media at HoopheadsPod on Twitter and Instagram, and be sure to check out the Hoopheads Pod Network for more great basketball content. Make sure you have pen and paper handy as you enjoy this episode of the Hoopheads Podcast with Coach Rob Brost from Bolingbrook High School in the state of Illinois. Hello and welcome to the Hoopheads Podcast. It's Mike Linsing here with my co-host Jason Sunkel. And tonight we are pleased to welcome back to the podcast after a long hiatus, Rob Brost, head coach at Bolingbrook High School in Bolingbrook, Illinois. Rob, welcome back. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah, I'm excited to be back. I thought maybe you guys forgot about me over here in Bolingbrook, but I'm definitely glad to be back. Since the last time I've been on, I think there's been, a myriad of basketball knowledge and people that know a lot more than me. So I'm just happy to be a part of it.
Well, we are very appreciative of those kind
Mike,
words.
I believe he's the 23rd. He's the 23rd return guest, right? That's what we just established last time. Was the last
right? Because
22nd return guest, right?
Correct. So you're our 23rd second timer. So that's an exclusive club.
Well, I'll take it. I mean, that's Michael Jordan, so I'll take that.
There you go. That's it. No question about that. Well, recalling our conversation from the last time, we had our LeBron, Michael Jordan conversation, and happy to report that we're both on the same side of that. And right. I think the Game 5 of the Lakers game continues to solidify my feelings.
Yes,
so I'm not going to say. I'm going to leave it there. I'm not going to say anything more than that. So
yeah, I'll just leave that too. That's for the old one. That's for the old one.
When LeBron gets 50 in the next two games, we'll probably have to quiet down a little bit. But we'll have to.
Very possible.
We'll have to wait and see. All right. Well, Rob, wanted to get started tonight by talking a little bit about the recruiting scene, and you've had a number of players over the course of your head coaching career go on to play college basketball. And we all know that these new rules that have granted NCAA players an extra year of eligibility has kind of thrown a monkey wrench into high school recruiting and figuring out for high school players, what are they going to do? Where are spots going to be for them? And how's that going to work? So maybe let's just start out by talking a little bit about what you're seeing as far as impact on high school players. And then we'll get into some of the things that are important as a high school coach for you to do to be able to help your players to transition on to the college level.
Yeah, I think it's a good point that you make, Mike. And I think it's a rough time with the new rules and the transfers and all of that stuff. It's a rough time to be a high school basketball player from a recruiting standpoint. And then you pack on the Corona season on top of that, and everybody gaining the extra year, and everybody can transfer to wherever they want. A lot of schools have just flat out told me, hey, we're recruiting through the portal now, and that's the way we're doing it. We're not looking for any high school kids. And, my guys are affected on both sides of that. We had two kids in the portal this year. One ended up at Kansas and one at Ball State. And so they both left their situations to go somewhere else. And, it affects them. So we're doing the re-recruiting thing with our guys that were already placed. And then we're trying to find places for our current high school kids. And so it's been rough for the current high school kids. And I don't blame the college coaches at all because, and I'm going to use some specific names here. Would you rather have a kid that has 2 years of Division I experience that led his team in scoring and rebounding and assists, which I had an alum that did that? Or would you have a current high school kid? Well, I'm not dumb either. I'd take the kid that led his team in scoring and rebounds at the Division I level. That's the kid that you want. So it's a really unique time, and it's really changed the face of recruiting from a high school standpoint. And kids with the same ability level or comparable ability level that I had 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago are not going to Division I schools. They have to find other paths and other avenues. This past season, we had the player of the year in our area, conference player of the year, all-stater. He's going to an NAIA school. It's a great school, and it's a good fit for him, and it's a full ride and all of that. But that caliber of player 5 years ago would have gone to a mid-major or a low-major school. So it's really changed how we have to go about our business.
All right, let's start by talking about players who are already in college. When those guys call you up and they're looking for advice from you, without maybe, again, getting into super specifics, but just in general, what are some of the conversations like that you're having with those guys when they're considering transferring? Because I look at it as there's two different ways that those transfers happen. One is a guy who's unhappy because he's not playing or not getting the minutes that he wants or not having the role that he wants. Or conversely, you have the player who has really excelled at the level that he is and now wants to jump up a level. So maybe just talk a little bit about the conversations that you've had with your guys who are already in school when they're considering whether or not to enter the transfer portal and where they're going to go once they're in it.
Yeah, and I'll answer that directly, Mike, but I'll add a third one, and that's a coaching change. And so we've had two situations where kids were transferring up, I guess you might say, or wanted maybe to get a higher level than what they were at. And then we had a coaching change, one that, and this has all happened in the last several years here. So, I try to advise my players like they're my sons. And so oftentimes I'll say my son's name is Trey. So I'll say, if Trey was you, this is what I would tell him. And, it's a unique situation for every individual. So I don't think you can blanket, hey, transferring up is the thing to do. Hey, staying where you are is the thing to do. Hey, if there's a coaching change, you got to get out of there. Every situation is unique, and that's what people need to understand. But I would say the majority of the time, my advice is to stay where they are because they chose that place for a reason, and that coach recruited them there for a reason. And the reason is they liked that player. And they liked his character. They liked everything about him. That's why he was there. And that's why he was recruited there in the first place. And that's why we made that decision. Now, if there's a coaching change, now that's another whole scenario. But, we had a kid that just this year was arguably one of the made his kind of name for himself during the NCAA tournament. And now he's at Kansas. So he went from Drake to Kansas. And so obviously that's a step up in competition. As far as night in and night out, but there's some real benefits of staying at Drake as well. So, we always try to look at all sides of that and talk about the positives and negatives of everything. And at the end of the day, you're kind of betting on yourself to, get it done. And in a case where you're leaving a school like Drake and going to Kansas, you're really betting on yourself because the best players in the country are going to get recruited to Kansas year in and year out.
Absolutely. So this may be a dumb question, but how involved as a player's high school coach, do you then have conversations with Bill Self at Kansas when you're thinking about whether or not a guy is going to go to a different college? Is that something that the high school coach gets involved in, those direct conversations with the college coaches, or is that more you just having a conversation with the player behind the scenes?
Well, I would say I don't know how other schools do it, but I'm pretty involved with our kids' recruitment. So I talked to Coach Self 3 or 4 times. But I knew the staff at Kansas prior to that. They'd recruited some other guys from our place that they didn't get. So I know those guys, in a matter of speaking. I don't go out to dinner with them every night or anything like that. But I know those guys, and we've had conversations in the past with them. So I think I'm a little bit more involved than most high school coaches. That's just a guess. I don't know how a lot of other high school coaches do it. But as soon as our young man that hit the transfer portal, my phone was ringing, 30 seconds later. And so, and obviously I had talked to our player prior to that before he made any decisions to get into the portal because we had talked several times about the positives and negatives of making a decision like this. And so, I'm pretty involved with that, and I took tons of calls that way for this particular player. And then we had another player at the exact same time hit the portal because his coach was let go. And so his was for a completely different reason, and he led the team in scoring, rebounds, and assists, all 3 of those. So he was in high demand as well. So it's different reasons and different issues. And then, of course, you had the incoming coach in that particular situation trying to recruit him to stay there. Right. So it's all of these factors, coming in. And what I try to help our guys with mostly is to block out the noise and all the other things that social media brings, that their friends bring, and sometimes even their parents bring. And I try to just be a calming influence, not only on the player, but the coaches that are recruiting them as well, because sometimes that gets a little out of hand too.
What are some of those outside distractions, again, without getting into specifics that are going to allow us to identify who's saying what, but what are some things that players are hearing from sort of their inner and maybe outer circle, or even people who aren't in their circle, that are influencing potential decisions that they're going to make?
Well, I think human nature as it is right now tells everybody, hey, the grass is greener on the other side no matter where you go. So, in one particular player's case, it's, hey, you're better than that school that you're at. You can play a lot higher. That noise starts to happen. For the other particular player who led his team in scoring, rebounding, and assists, like, there's no way they should be putting that much pressure on you. There's no way you should lead them in every category, so it's just everybody thinks they know, but in actuality, only the people, meaning the player and the coaches that are in that situation, actually know. And so we talk about this with our guys from the time they begin to get recruited, as sophomores and juniors, that they got to, cut the noise out. And because if they start listening to the noise, then that's eventually where they're going to be sitting with all the people that are making the noise, instead of the people that are actually doing the performing and playing and the coaching. And so, it's hard sometimes. It's hard for parents a lot of times to get through all of that too, but that's what I'm here for. I've been doing this for a long time now, and we've had a moniker of success here, placing our players in good situations where they can get on the floor and be successful if they earn it. And if they don't, then they won't. So, those are the types of things that really affect a player's psyche. And a lot of times it's even some of their own family members that think, you're better than this. If you want to get to this level, you have to go to this school, things like that. And we're all about fit. And, I always tell our guys, go where you're wanted, and then you'll have a good chance to be successful. So, it varies with every player, but the noise seems to get more and more, gets louder and louder as we move forward here, just because of time and social media and all of those influencers. Kids want to see tweets, and they read Twitter, and they read. And the other thing I have to tell our guys is, once you decide, like in our one particular kid's case who chose Kansas, as soon as you choose Kansas, everybody's going to say, why did you go there? Why did you go there? Why didn't you go to Gonzaga? Why didn't you go to Texas? Why didn't you go to Illinois? All of those schools. And so, we've been through this a lot. So you just have to be ready for all of that stuff and make the decision that's best for you. And then, stand with it. And then you got to go to work, because the proof is in the pudding, and you gotta do work when you get there, and you got to continue to work while you're preparing to go there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, especially when you're talking about going to, anytime you go to a new place, it doesn't matter whether you're stepping up a level or you're going, at the same level, or you're just going to, because the coaching staff changed. Obviously, anywhere you go, you have to reprove yourself. And that goes from going from middle school to freshman ball, from freshman ball to the JV, from, every time you step out on the floor, you have to be able to prove yourself and be ready to go. And as we know, it is very, very easy to get distracted and to allow lots of other things to kind of creep into your world. And then that can take you off of the things that you need to be focused on in order to be at your best when you get out on the floor. When you have conversations with the college coaches talking about transfers, are the conversations similar to what you have with college coaches who are recruiting your high school players?
I think it's a little different, Mike, because they've proven that they can do it at that level. And so usually when you're talking to a transfer, it's somebody that's already proven at that level that they can be successful. To what degree, that's up to the kid, but the kid has already proven that they can be successful. When you're, talking about a high school kid, there's a lot of questions. I can find anything about any player that I don't like. I can find one thing that I don't like about any high school player that I can see. So it's easy to not recruit a kid, or it's easy to find a hole in a kid's game, especially a high school kid. And so that's some of the things that you're fighting from a high school coach's perspective, because when you see any kid, he's going to have a weakness, especially that's in high school. And so anybody can find that and then say, well, what about this? Well, of course, I'm not going to lie to you. He might not be the best shooter, but he's lightning quick and can get to the basket. And so then the conversation is, well, all he does is get to the basket. Well, what is he supposed to do? Shoot 3-pointers when he can get to the basket? And so, it's almost a double-edged sword. And we've gotten to the point now where some coaches have recruited so many of our guys and not gotten them. Some of them are playing we recruited so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and we haven't gotten any of them. Why should we recruit? Well, that's because you didn't do the job in the first place. You're the one that needs to convince my kid or my player to go to your place. So it's not me. I work for the student athlete. I work for my player, and I want what's best for him. And so, it's all different angles, and we've been doing this a long time, so we've been kind of hit with every angle. So it's not our first rodeo. So that's a good thing for our players, and it's a good thing for the college coaches because they know they can trust me. If I say a kid can do something, they pretty much believe me now because we've been doing it, and we've had kids be very successful at pretty much every level.
Yeah, I would guess that once you've had the experience that you've had with coaching players who have moved on and had success at the college level compared to a high school coach who maybe it's their first real Division I prospect, that the level of trust between you and the college coaches compared to that first-time coach, it takes a little bit of a time, I'm guessing, to establish that and make sure that what you're saying
yes.
is to be believed. To me, that always seems like it's really, really important because obviously any coach on the high school level or AAU coach, I mean, your job, as you said, you're working for the student athlete. So clearly you want to be able to say things that are supportive of your athlete. And yet at the same time, you have to be able to, I think, have the conversation with, I'm guessing, with the athlete and the parent of, look, I'm going to advocate for you, but I'm also not going to make stuff up about, what you can do or what your level of athleticism is or whatever that may be, because you have to continue to establish credibility with those college coaches. Because then the next time they come around the pike, if you haven't been truthful with them, you're going to be doing a disservice to that next kid in line. So just talk a little bit about what those conversations are like with the families and the player about, look, I'm going to do everything I can for you, but I'm not going to say things that aren't true.
Yeah, there's no doubt that the truth makes everybody faster. It makes everybody faster, and it allows you to do your job better. So the truth to the college coach allows him to evaluate better. It allows him to trust what I say because he knows I'm telling him the truth. It allows my player to work on the things that I see that he needs to get better at. It allows the family to better, choose the level and, have a more realistic view of where they're headed. So the truth is the key to this whole thing, and the truth makes everybody faster. If I can't trust you, Mike, then I got to check out what you're saying with 3 other people before I can do what you said that you asked me to do. And so if I trust you and then I don't have to check with the 3 people to see if that's true, then I can move a lot faster. So once that trust is established with all parties involved, it makes the whole process a little bit smoother. I'm not going to say any recruiting process is totally smooth, but it just makes it smoother because everybody's telling everybody the truth. And so, that goes for the college coach telling me the truth. That goes for the player telling me the truth. That goes for me talking to the college coach. And, assistant college coaches have a really tough job because they have to recruit your kid, even if he's not the number 1 priority. And so, because they might not get the number 1 or the number 2 priority, and your kid might be the 3rd in line. And so they have to keep you kind of on the line without totally biting, if that makes sense. And so assistants have a really hard job at the college level to keep all of that juggled all at the same time in case they don't get a kid or in case they don't get their first kid. And so I think the truth and the trust between all parties, the kid, the family of the young man, and then me, and then the college coaches, if everybody's telling the truth, it makes everybody faster and we can all do a much better job. And that's something that we talk about with our guys all the time when we have one-on-one meetings when they're freshmen or sophomores, whenever they get to me. When we have one-on-one meetings, that's what we talk about first. We need to tell the truth. And so they're used to that from me. And we do it the right way, and we try to make kids feel like they're important and they're special. And there's no way that you can get extraordinary performance from a kid unless that kid feels extraordinarily valued. And so we try to value our kids, but we have to tell them the truth. And that's when they really know their value, is because you're truthful with them and you're truthful with their family. And then they're going to be truthful with you too. And so the truth really makes you faster. And that's the key to the whole thing.
All right. When you think about a college coach and you having a conversation with them, what are some areas that you're looking for them to be truthful with you and your player about? What are some key areas that you want to make sure that, hey, this guy's not just blowing smoke, that he's actually telling us what the situation is? What are some things that you're looking for there?
Well, I want to know who else they're recruiting. Once it gets down to it, I mean, obviously at the first part when there's offers thrown around and all of that stuff, everybody's kind of, willy-nilly about that stuff, I think, at the beginning. But when it gets right down to it and we're ready to make a decision between 3 or 4, maybe even 5 schools that are seriously recruiting our player, some of the things either I or the player's family has to ask is, who else are you recruiting? If player X takes the scholarship, is there still a scholarship for me? If I take the scholarship, are you still going to be recruiting player X? How many players do you have coming back? And all of that stuff is such in flux right now because of the whole transfer thing.
Right.
These conversations that we've had in the last 3 or 4 months with college coaches are much different than we had 4 or 5 years ago. When 4 or 5 years ago, I got 2 guys leaving, we need this and this. Now the conversation is, we're not sure who's going to hit the portal. We're not sure who we're going to recruit out of the portal. So we're just kind of in a holding pattern right now with high school kids. I got that a ton this past season and this past, 3 to 6 months, I would say. So it's really the landscape, like we talked about right at the beginning, has really changed with that. And so some of these questions, they honestly don't know the answer to, because they don't know who's going to hit the portal. And if they do hit the portal, is their coach going to want another transfer, or are they going to take a high school kid? So it changes so quickly because of the portal, who's in, who's out, who's committed, who's not. It's almost changes by the day. And so, stuff changes fast nowadays, whereas even 2 or 3 years ago, it was a little bit more cut and dried, and, you knew exactly what was going to happen.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talked about off the top that you talked to several coaches that have said, look, we're not even going to look at high school players because we can recruit out of the portal and get guys who have already proven themselves on the college level. And we had a couple coaches talk to us about that and say that same exact thing, that, almost why would I even look at a high school player who's completely unproven? I mean, unless you're talking about a player who's a top 100, top 150 player in the country, the odds of, if you can get an established college player who's already done it, then you already know that kid's already adjusted to the academics. They've already adjusted socially. You don't have to deal with any of that. They've gotten up to speed. We all know the difference between a high school practice, even a high-level high school practice versus a college practice. There's a huge step up in intensity and physicality and just the mental strain that it takes and all those kinds of things. And so I just look at it and you start to say, at what point, how does it affect those high school kids, and how many years is it going to take for this thing to normalize? And I talked to Paul Biancardi, I guess it was probably a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, and Paul said he thinks it's going to take 3 or 4 years. Eventually it'll normalize, but he said it's going to take a while because it's not like, okay, so now this year's class is affected. Well, even if those kids end up going to, like your player goes to an AI school and maybe he ends up staying there, or maybe he ends up going next year or 2 years from now, he goes to a Division I school. Well, he's still then taking away a spot that might have previously gone to a high school player. And by granting all these guys that extra year of eligibility, which you completely understand, and it's completely defensible, and in a lot of ways it makes a ton of sense. And yet, again, if your timing of when you were born is wrong, I mean, you could really be in a situation where, man, I could have been playing Division I college basketball and now I'm here. And it goes back to, I think, and this is one of the things that we've talked with a lot of coaches about, both at the high school and the college level, is it's really, really so important for a player to be able to find the right fit for them. And that includes the school, the coach, the style of play, the players who are already there in the program, all those things. So when you sit down, and let's shift out of the college transfer portal and think about your high school players, when you're having a conversation with your high school players under normal circumstances, what are those conversations like in terms of helping them to determine what's going to be the right fit for them all around, including school, basketball program, coach, socially? What are those conversations like, and what are the things you're talking about with a high school kid?
One of the main things, and there's not one thing that is the end all be all when we're talking about recruiting with our guys. It's a myriad of factors, and you don't choose a school because of one thing or the other. You choose it because of a combination of factors. And I think one of the most important factors is, how hard are they recruiting you? Do they really want you there? If you committed today, would they be happy? Would they be thrilled that you are going there? And if you feel like that's the case, that's probably one of the good things about that place. And then I think it's also important for our guys, just because of the way we do things, is that they can have a relationship with the head coach. And so at some places, and I'm not knocking any coaches or how they do it or how they, do things, but having a relationship with the head coach. And if the head coach is recruiting you, I think that's a huge advantage, because the head coach is putting time into you from a recruiting standpoint. And I get it. At certain levels, head coaches don't have time, and in certain schools do it a little bit different. But if the head coach is taking time to recruit you, he's certainly going to take time to build a relationship with you. And I'm not in never land here. I get that assistant coaches' relationship with players at the college level a lot of the times is more critical than the head coach. But the guy that's making or lady that's making the decisions, you have to be able to at least have a relationship with them and be comfortable going to them. And so, does a place really want you? What is your relationship with the head coach, or what can that relationship build into? And then, obviously things like what major do they have, style of play. And then another thing we talk about, what are the character of the players that they have currently? And that's a major factor with our kids. And so that, a lot of that you don't know for sure, but you're able to discern a lot of that from past players that they've had, visits, unofficial and official visits that you take. So you're able to discern some of that as best you can. And so, all of those things play a part in it. Style of play, facilities, schedule. We have, when you're going far away and it's a bigger school, are there games on TV so your family can watch, things like that. So all of those things are taken into account. And so it's not one thing being more important than the other, but I think, does the school really want you, and can you have a relationship with the head coach? I think those things are of critical importance. And like I said earlier in our recording, I try to advise our players like they're my sons. So Trey, my son's in 7th grade, and I would say, if you were Trey, this is what I would tell you. And I tell all our players, I'm never going to tell them where to go, but I'll tell them where not to go if something gets a little sideways or a little crooked or something just doesn't seem right. And so I haven't had to do that a lot, but I've done it, a handful of times, like, hey, we got to take such and such a school out of the mix because of this, that, or the third. And so I don't ever tell our guys where to go, but I will tell them where not to go. So, and again, the trust factor is the most critical thing, because it makes everybody faster.
Hey, hoopheads, we all hate ankle sprains, and they happen way too often. Ankle injuries are the #1 sports-related injury. Arise is trying to change that. With the iFast, your athletes get preventative protection and full mobility. Athletes no longer need to wear bulky braces that limit performance and give mediocre protection. Anyone playing sports should be using these products. Keep your athletes in the game. Don't wait for them to get hurt to take action. Visit www.arise.com/team pricing to learn more. That's ARYSE.com. What's an example of a red flag that you said, oh, this isn't the right spot?
Well, it could be something as simple as, I don't think they're being truthful on who else they're recruiting. Something as simple as that, because you follow Twitter, they've got offers. They say they haven't offered anybody else. And then the day you leave campus, they offer 3 other guys at your position, something like that. Or it could be something as serious as they don't know the rules. And I'm not just talking money changing hand, but I'm talking simple things like, before a few years ago, they couldn't pay for a sibling to go on an official visit. And some schools were trying to do that, like things like that, where the rules and, they just are not abiding by them. So they either don't know them or don't care about them. And so those are a couple examples. And, our kids are not, top 20 kids in the country. So as a general rule. So, we're not talking cars or money or anything like that. High school. So, we're talking rules like the example I gave you. For example, paying for meals on an unofficial visit or things like that. So, those would be just a few examples.
How do you keep yourself up to date on what the relevant rules are so that you can be educated and help your players? Is that something that you're talking to college coaches about that you trust? Is that mainly where you're getting your information?
That's the main piece. Like if I don't know a rule or if I think something has changed, I'll call a couple assistants that I trust, and I'll leave their names out of it. But I've called 2 or 3 guys several times about, hey, can we do this? Like, what is this? Or can this happen? I didn't think this was right. And then maybe there's a rule changed. And it's a good example that I used before. 3 or 4 years ago, you could not pay for a sibling to go on an official visit. Now you can. And so, those things change a lot. It just depends.
Gotcha. Makes a lot of sense. I had no idea you could take a sibling along on an official visit. So
I think now you can. I know 2 or 3 years ago you could not. It could just be your dad and mom. But now I think if that could have changed. But I thought it was you could take a parent. So you could take a parent and a brother, 2 parents, whatever it is.
Got it. So some combination of 2 other people.
Right. Yes.
Got it. Makes sense.
If they're your immediate family. So it can't be like twice removed and, that type of thing.
That's right. It can't be your
grandma's
cousin on your uncle's side's godfather.
Yes. That's exactly right.
Can't take him along.
Yeah. I mean, and you can never take the head high school coach along. That's for sure. So he can go, but he has to pay his own way. I've done that several times.
There you go.
You definitely know about that.
So what's that like when you go on an official visit, when you take that trip? What do you remember about those trips? What are things that you're looking to add to the experience?
Well, again, I'm there to just be a resource if need be. Sometimes I'm hardly even needed there. Sometimes I don't go. If they ask me to go, I will go. Certainly if a family's never been through it before, they might ask me to go, or they just want me there to ask questions, to bounce off ideas, that type of thing. And so I'm not a part of, obviously, every part of official visits, but I enjoy going just because it gives you a look at how they treat their players, because you see them interacting with their players, and you can tell pretty quick what is sincere and what's a show. And so, that's very nice. And I like to be there with my guys too. I like to, after coach gets done talking to him, then we can debrief and say, what did you like about this? What do you think about this? Do you think he's being truthful with this? That type of thing. So, and then when you compare it to other schools, that's when you really get a feel for the schools that are recruiting you, is when you can compare it to what just happened the week before, 2 weeks before at school A, and now you're at school B. You can compare it to those things. And a lot of times it's just how you feel about the people that are there. And that's the most important thing. So, my role changes depending on who the player is, how far the recruitment is along, all of that stuff. Sometimes I go, they want me to go. Sometimes they don't. And that's perfectly fine. And so it's a good problem to have, guys wanting you to go on visits with them.
Right, exactly. What are your conversations like with the parents of a kid that's being recruited in terms of what are they asking you? Is it different from what the player is asking you? I'm sure there are some families that you're more involved with having those discussions with parents, and others where the parents are kind of left, doing their own thing and maybe don't want you necessarily as much involved. Right. So just what are those conversations like with the parents of kids from your school that are being recruited?
Yeah, I think it's harder with the parents because you don't know them as well as you know the kid. The kid you've had several conversations with, you're close with, and if you weren't close with them, they wouldn't ask you to come. And so the parents you've probably talked to, a handful of times. And so they bring a totally new perspective. And a lot of times they can be part of that noise group too that we talked about earlier. And so people are talking to the parents, and a lot of times, at least for our guys, it's the first time their son or daughter has been through it. Now I've been doing it long enough. Now I'm getting some brothers and some sisters and that have been through the recruiting process. But if they've never been through it before, everything looks good. I mean, everything, when you leave a visit, and one of our kind of standard rules is you're not going to commit on a visit because everything looks great on the visit. The coach, everything is top notch. Everything is pristine. Everything looks great. Everything sounds great on the visit. So when you get done with any visit, you don't like that school, they did something really crazy or wrong on that visit. And that's kind of what our general rule of thumb. And then when a kid is ready to commit, if he's being recruited by several schools, I'll say, when you're ready, whenever that is, you let me know and you let your parents know. And then we'll take 48 hours and we won't say anything to anybody. And then after 48 hours, if you're still good with it, then we'll commit. And so that's just how I try to keep everybody on an even keel and try to be fair to everyone that's involved. Certainly coaches will try to put time pressures on kids, and I don't think that's necessarily fair, but I get it as well. If you're recruiting two kids and one kid's I get all of those pieces, but I work for my kid. And so I just try to advise them as best I can.
Yeah, I think ultimately what I hear you saying throughout the course of this whole thing is that you try to help the kid be very intentional and deliberate about the decision that they're making and not be swayed by one conversation or one part of a visit or one aspect. It's trying to get them to take in the whole picture, and then that allows them to make a decision about where they fit the best. And it may not be perfect because there probably is no perfect fit. Right. But when you balance out all those pieces that you talked about, then you're going to ultimately end up hopefully with a good decision that's going to enable you to go to a place that's the right place for you and allow you to have success both on the court and academically. All right, let's shift backwards to high school players. And one of the things that we talked about before we jumped on was the relationship between high school coaches and AAU coaches, which depending on who you talk to, depending on what area of the country you're in, depending upon your perspective, there's so many different opinions about how those two groups coexist, how they work together, how they battle against one another, how they're on the same side of the equation, how they're on different sides of the equation. So just wanted to get your opinion on how do you as a high school coach, how do you look at the relationship between yourself and your program and the AAU coaches and programs that your players participate in, and how do you navigate that as a high school coach?
First of all, I think that the AAU coaches, the AAU scene, and all of it is vital to your high school student athlete. And so I think it's an important piece of their development. And so I know a lot of colleagues of mine, especially, ones locally here, tend to fight with the AAU coaches for time and when I say fight, I don't mean literally, but you know what I'm saying, as far as like they battle with them. I have the exact opposite approach. I think that the AAU piece is vital to their development, not only as players, but as people. And then if you can build a relationship with the AAU program that your kids are playing for, that's even better. And so And when you do that, and you can do that over time, then you can build relationships with the AAU coaches just like you do with the college coaches. And again, there's no blanket statement that one way is the right way. Certainly you can trust certain individuals in the AAU set, and you can not trust certain individuals in the AAU set, just like the AAU coaches can trust certain high school coaches, and then you can't trust others. So I try to work with the AAU teams as much as possible, and I think it's really critical from a recruiting standpoint to get with the right club or AAU team, if you will, to get seen. And then the follow-up happens. I mean, you'd be shocked how many calls I get during live periods from AAU teams like, is so-and-so yours? Yep, he's mine. Oh, my goodness. This is while events are going on in July. I'll get a text or a call like, this is yours? This is yours? Yes, this young man is mine. So, I think it's critical to develop the relationships if you can. It's harder and harder to do that because there's so many AAU teams now with so many coaches, and kids are switching teams so fast. Even some of my guys are switching teams, and that's a definite red flag that we would not like to do. But on the other hand, if the situation isn't what you thought it was going to be and, stuff happens, then, obviously you may have to switch teams. But the really good programs with really solid coaches on the AAU set are critical for the development of our guys from a competitive standpoint, from a recruiting standpoint. And the more you can work with them, the better. And if those coaches are worth their grain of salt, they want to work with us too. And so, it's a give and take for sure. But certainly I can't put, our guys, in the same scenario as Peach Jam can put them in. A kid that's playing in Peach Jam is going to, have some eyeballs on him that aren't going to necessarily come to Bolingbrook High School unless they see him at Peach Jam first. And then they come to Bolingbrook High School to finalize things and do things. So certainly we've been doing this a long time now. So coaches will just call and say, who do you have next? Who's your next great kid? Who's your next good guard? Things like that. But I think the AAU set is critical in a lot of ways to our players' development.
So as we've found out through the course of the podcast, obviously you have a lot of experience with having players on your team in your program that have been recruited and that are recruitable. But there's a lot of high school coaches out there who are listening who maybe don't have that same level of experience, either because they haven't had players at that level, or maybe they're just a new coach just getting started in their career. So when you start thinking about building relationships with good AAU coaches and good AAU programs, if you were going to sit down with a high school coach who was early in their career and was still trying to figure out how to navigate that, what advice would you have them in terms of what should they be looking for in a good AAU program and a good AAU coach? What kind of things do you want to see before you're encouraging your players to go and sign up with that particular group?
I mean, first, I think you want to know a little bit of history of the program, not necessarily if they've had big time players or anything like that, but A, how they treated their players, and B, do they hold their players accountable? And this is something that we talk about with our guys all the time. If you're going to be good and you're going to really do this thing like you should, this is going to be difficult. And it's going to be difficult at Bolingbrook High School, and it's going to be difficult for your AAU teams. There's going to be difficult situations, and it's going to happen over and over and over again. And so we ask you to do difficult things, and it's not for everybody to play at Bolingbrook High School. We're going to lose some games. We're going to play bad sometimes. And so when you're talking about those AAU values, I think they hopefully are similar to the ones that you have. Not that you're telling them what to do or anything like that, but you just hope that they're in it for the right reasons. And again, a young coach, and I see this a lot with young coaches that want to be a part of my staff, where they say, how can I get my resume to look like this? This all takes time. You have to just get to work, and you have to grind it out a little bit on your own. And it just takes time to develop those relationships and to gain trust with not only the AAU coaches, but the college coaches and the colleagues and your players for that matter. And so I think young coaches sometimes get caught up in a similar noise as players do. They, get on social media and they want to be known and they want this and that. And when in actuality, the relationships you have with your players are the most important thing. And so that doesn't mean that you, have to blow smoke up anybody's rear or anything like that. Exactly the opposite is true. If you hold kids accountable, that's what they want. And they want discipline, but they also want to know that you care about them off the floor. And I think, when you say, how do you steer your kids? I try not to steer my kids to AAU programs because I just don't want the AAU coaches saying, well, did you made that kid go over there? But there's certain teams and coaches that I trust more than others because I've been doing this for a long time. And so, you make decisions based on, character. You make decisions based on, are they going to hold kids accountable? And then you tell your player that this is going to be hard and you got to expect it to be hard. Just like when they go to college, like committing to the college, that's the easy part. Getting recruited is easy. You get to have fun. You're on the phone, you do it. And the same thing with the AAU thing. You see all the stuff that they get and all of the stuff where they play and all of that. That's easy. The hard part is the work that goes into getting that. And we talk about that all the time with our guys. People see our brand Jordan logo on our floor, the shoes that we get or the places that we get to play. And that's all fine and good. But we have those things because we, can play basketball. We have that. And then we say please and thank you at training tables. We say please and thank you when we're on the road. We do all of those things. And those things are hard to do because it goes against the grain of a lot of what people think happens. And people don't see that part of Bolingbrook basketball or top AAU programs. They don't see that. All they see is like when we play in a Brand Jordan game or who we play on statewide TV. That's what they see. But we don't have that because of that. We have that because of all the work that we put in and how we carry ourselves off the floor. Because if we were jerks, we wouldn't, none of this would happen for us. And so it's hard for kids to understand that. It's hard for parents sometimes to understand that. And it's hard for young coaches to understand that this all took time. I mean, this is my 14th season at Bolingbrook, and it wasn't all roses. We went through 2 or 3 years where it was rough. And, we didn't win many games and the culture wasn't very good and all of that stuff. And so, the thing that really, I think, helps our kids is that we tell them right from the beginning, this is going to be hard. And if it's not hard, everybody would just do it. If it was easy, everyone would just do it. And so I think that's one of the things, and I know I kind of convoluted the answer to AU program, but it all goes back to the same thing, building relationships with those people and finding people that you can trust, and then it makes everybody faster.
Yeah, and I think it's 100% right. And I love the analogy you gave about how saying please and thank you and how that's difficult to do. And I've had this conversation with my wife, and I've had it with friends and other parents. When you see kids who are polite, and I'm not talking about basketball players, I'm just talking about kids that as a parent, like, believe me, I know how much time and energy and how many reminders and just cajoling and reinforcing how much it takes of all that stuff to be able to get your kids to be polite and to look someone in the eye and to say please and thank you and to shake their hand and do all those things. Like those things. Now, maybe 1 out of 1,000 kids does that just naturally. They just have some gift for it. But the other 999 kids out of 1,000 only get there because there was some parent who pulled their hair out over and over and over again, trying to get their kid to be polite. And I think that goes to, it's sort of the same thing when you're talking about as a teacher trying to establish the right classroom environment. And when you're a coach, and you're talking about trying to establish a culture in your program, like people usually only see the end result and they don't see all the hard work that goes into that. I think it's a great point. I think it's something especially for young people to remember, whether that's young coaches or whether it's just, you're a high school kid. It doesn't happen easily. And that can be manners, that can be on the basketball floor, that can be in a million different places. The hard things in life, the things that are ultimately worth it, are things that are difficult. Or as you said, everybody would do it. So let's take that thought and let's go to the idea of things that as a high school coach are challenging. And so what are some things when you think about being a high school coach in the year 2021, and you can compare this maybe to early in your career, you can just say it in general, but just what are some things that day in and day out that challenge you, that force you to be at your best in order to create the kind of team, environment, players, kids that you want to have at Bolingbrook?
I think not convincing kids, but showing them, and we talked about the noise, earlier, that the people that really know what's happening and really have your best interests are the ones in the locker room. We know what's happening. We know what it's like. We know what you're going through because we know you. And I tell this to our guys all the time. I don't care how you play. I really don't. Obviously, I'd like you to play well, and I'd like to win every game and all of those things. And I'm going to hold you accountable on the floor too. But I care where your heart is, because if your heart's in the right place, eventually your play is going to follow. And it's hard for kids to understand that. And it's very difficult for parents to understand that. Everybody wants a microwave and everybody wants the stuff that comes at the end without going through the stuff that made it worth it in the first place. And so, a lot of times you worry about, are kids going to stick it out? Are they going to wait their turn? Like in our case, because it's hard to play varsity at our place. And so we don't have a lot of young kids that play varsity right away. And so they could easily go to another school and, be on the varsity. That's just a common example. Or do you want to wait it out and do the work, and then you can be the next great player? We've had 4 players of the year in the local area 4 out of the last 5 years. Well, none of them started on the varsity when they were sophomores, not one of them. And so there was other kids from other schools that were sophomores on the varsity, but our kids weren't. And so, but if they do the right things and they keep at it, they're going to eventually be exactly where they want to be. So nobody's path is the same, and nobody's path is linear. I think it's hard for players to understand that. Everybody goes through bumps and bruises, and we're going to go through it as a team. And I think that's why the character piece and the culture piece is so important, because at the end of the day, we win games because of that. Now, obviously, we have very talented players and we put them in the right spots, and all of those things are important. But the longevity of it has happened because we have, nice isn't the right word to put it, but we have really good kids, and they trust each other, and they trust me, and I trust them. And we talk about this all the time. If your relationship with me is based solely on how you play, or if you play, this is not the place for you to be. Just like my relationship with you is not based on if you play or how well you play. And so we talk about that a lot, and it's hard to get kids to understand that. It's even harder to get parents to understand that, because they're not at practice every day. They're not at the team meals. They're not at the one-on-one meetings. They don't know. And they think they do because they just see what happens on Friday nights and Saturday nights. And so that's the most difficult part for me, but it's also the most enjoyable part, because then I get to see kids when they're vulnerable. And that's when you really get to see growth, is when kids trust you enough to be vulnerable and say, Coach, I really messed this up. What can I do? Like when a kid says that to me, I know that he trusts me, because he says, hey, this is what's up with me. And so in our one-on-one meetings that we do several times throughout the year, we talk about a lot of stuff, and hardly any of it's basketball. What's your family doing? What's up with your sister? How's your chemistry grade? What's up with your girlfriend? How's your mom? Is your dad being too tough on you? What's your relationship like with your all of those things. And so when you do that, and then they trust you, then they play really, really hard. And
somebody asked me the last clinic I did on the Zoom here a couple months ago, I did an online clinic. They said, well, what's your team known for? Obviously, we're known for playing fast, scoring a lot of points, but I think we play really, really hard. And I think we play really, really hard because they know we care about them. And it goes back to what I said before. If you want extraordinary effort, you got to make the kids feel like they're extraordinarily valued. And when you do that, they're going to play really hard for you.
Okay, so how do you translate that from the kids trust you, that you built this relationship? How does that translate when the pavement, when the feet hit the pavement? How does that translate into getting the kids to play hard? Whereas if you didn't have that trust, what would make it more difficult? I know I'm not phrasing it exactly right, but I think you understand what I'm trying to say. How do you translate that relationship piece that you've built into getting your kids to play as hard as you need them to play to have the success you want to have?
Well, I think first off, you reward and you praise what you want to see happen the most. And so simple things like running the floor as hard as you can, we call it win your race. If you don't win your race, you're coming out. I mean, that's it. There's no excuse. There's no that guy got ahead. There's none of that. That's a non-negotiable for us. And so our kids know this. And so if they want to stay out there, they got to win their race, going on each end, going from offense to defense or defense to offense. And so, you have your non-negotiables and all of those things, but if they can trust me, and I know I've talked about this ad nauseum here during this recording, if they can trust me, then they can move faster. And so I think the caring beyond the court translates to on the court, because they know if either of us makes a mistake, if I make a coaching error and it loses us the game, I can say that to them. Hey, I messed this up. I apologize. I mean, that was my mistake. I should have done this or had you do this, and I didn't. And it cost us the game. So we can be vulnerable with each other so that the next time they're going to trust me again. And they know it's just like with my assistants. And I use this as an example with our players. Sometimes my assistants come to me with things and then I don't do them, but they have to trust me because I'm the head coach with what I decide to do. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But if we're all not pulling in the right direction, it's never going to work. And so you give yourself a chance if everybody's on the same page. And again, that doesn't mean it's perfect. It just means that we're going to all be together in the end. And whether that's a win or a loss or whatever it is, we're all going to be together. And so it really doesn't work unless everybody cares about one another. And I think that's what translates onto the floor.
That's a really good answer. And I think that's one of the things that when I think about conversations that I've had with coaches, it's always how do I utilize that trust, that relationship that I'm trying to build in order to get what I need to get out of my team on the floor. And I think what you just said is that it's a two-way street. You have to trust your players and they have to trust you. And when you have that and it's genuine, then that allows you to ask them things that maybe somebody else couldn't ask them to do because they say, well, look, this guy has my best interest at heart, not just on the basketball floor, but in my life in general. And so therefore I know he's not going to ask me to do something that is going to be detrimental to me or to our team. And it just makes a ton of sense. Now, one of the things that you've said a couple times is just the fact that, hey, we're going to work really, really hard if we're going to achieve what we want to achieve. And that may not be for everybody. Right. So address that a little bit deeper in terms of what are some things, let's talk off-season basketball and forget about the in-season stuff, but let's just talk about what do you ask of your players during the off-season that challenges them, pushes them, that allows you to excel? Because we all know today, you go back to maybe the time when I was playing in the 80s and you could get away with the season ends and you just disappear and everybody goes their own way. And maybe you had a guy like me that was out working on their game all the time, but it certainly wasn't the same. The high school coach, in a lot of cases just kind of disappeared and you saw him back again in the fall. And we all know, obviously, that's not the case today. Even even just at a baseline level, there's a level of involvement that didn't exist 20 or 30 years ago. But just talk a little bit about the commitment that you ask your players to make and that you make in the off season to get your program where you need it to be.
Well, first off, I say this all the time. If you're only doing what we ask you to do, you're never going to be an elite player. You're just not. It's just not the nature of what happens. And I've referenced Trey a couple times. He's my 7th grader. And if you want to be better than all of the guys that you're playing against, you need to do things that they're not willing to do. And so that's kind of what we ask them to do. And so we set out a plan with them. And for some kids, it's specific. This year has been kind of a crapshoot, for lack of a better term, because of the corona. We couldn't get in gyms, and we couldn't, it was just a disaster. We didn't know if we were going to have a season. And so this past year aside, we ask our kids to, work really hard, just like they do in the regular season. And it looks different for every player because everybody's situation is a little bit different. Whether that's socioeconomic, whether that's, their home situation, whether that's, can they get to the gym? Can they not? Some kids can afford a personal trainer. Some kids can't. And so, everybody has their own plan as to how they're going to get better, and they have to execute it. In Illinois, we only get 25 contact days in the off season, which we use in the summer. This year, because of the corona, we're only getting 20. And so it's a really unique to Illinois compared to a lot of states. And so, we have to have a plan, and they have to kind of enact that on their own. And then I have to trust that they're doing it. And then obviously there's some follow-up with it as well. And the AAU team is a big part of it as well. But getting individual skill work in is of critical importance. And starting way back when Prentice Nixon was a freshman or a sophomore, he started on his own coming to the gym by himself at 6:15 a.m. and doing this shooting thing. And he started just, Coach, can I do it? And it has carried over the skill workouts that he started on his own. It has, pulled all the way through. And now almost all of our guys do them in some way, shape, or form in the morning. Now this year obviously is a punt year because of the corona and, not being in school and all that stuff. But we're lucky. He kind of started the trend of, hey, I'm going to get to school at 6:00 and I'm going to get my work in before I even go to class. And so, that kind of started organically through him. And then everybody saw the success he had. And then they wonder what he was doing. And he did it as a sophomore, then he did it as a junior, and then he did it as a senior. And then the younger guys started to do it. And then the next wave started to do it. And now, we're going to have to kind of reestablish it because we haven't had a regular school in a year. But having really good players that work really, really hard helps that whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you can get your guys started on that, and in your case, it wasn't even you getting started. It's a player that takes that responsibility, and then it just gets passed down. And we all know that when you can have players enforcing your culture and enforcing your standards of what you do, that it makes such a huge difference. It makes things it takes on a lot more meaning when it goes player to player than it does top down. And I know one of the things that you and I talked about on our last episode that you were on a couple of years ago, you talked a lot about how you feel like you became a better coach once you felt like you were able to delegate things more, whether that was to your assistant coaches or to players. But I think that's a point that's worth reiterating for somebody who maybe didn't listen to that first episode. So just talk a little bit about how your growth as a coach, you really feel like it took off, and your ability to be effective kind of counterintuitively, you became more effective when you delegated more instead of taking on more things yourself.
Yeah, it's weird. And I said this, I was talking to a high school coach from Dallas who called me 2 weeks ago about playing fast, and somehow I got my name. But anyways, I said, if you came to one of our practices, you'd be shocked at how much I don't do. Like if you came to one of our practices, me and you could stand and talk on the side for the majority of my practice. And so I talk about this a lot. My job is to make sure that every player in our program, varsity down to freshman, gets coached. My job is not to coach every single player. And so that's counterintuitive to a lot of coaches. And I'm lucky because I have 2 assistants that have been head coaches, so they understand the head coach seat, and they don't necessarily want to be in the head coach seat anymore. So that's been really helpful as well, because I can trust them, and our staff has stayed the same for the last 10 years or so. So we really have a good rapport between all of us. And, I really hone in more on are our guys going as hard as possible? And then B, can I connect with every single one of our players before practice starts and or during the practice? Like I'll pull a kid to the side like, hey man, do you think you're really going as hard as you can right now? Is there something up that you need to tell me about? Because it doesn't look like you're going hard. Just little things like that. And then the 90% of the coach, I got you. My bad. Yep. Here we go. So it's just little things that help build trust between our players, and it helps our coaches grow, and it helps our players trust our assistants as well. And I've seen growth in not only our assistants, but our players trusting the assistants and what we're doing. And so I really think, this takes me back to, I've been doing some reading, and Lucas Jaden and Josh Metcalf are 2 of my favorite authors. And Lucas Jaden said the other day, are you leading and equipping them, or are you controlling them? And if you're controlling them, then that's not what you want. But if you're leading and equipping them, that's what you want, so that they, and meaning assistant coaches and players, are in charge of their development. Now, obviously, I'm there to steer it, and I'm there when it gets off track. I need to make sure that it gets on track. And so it was a little counterintuitive, like you said, to give up some of that control, but we have really flourished since that happened. And I think it goes back to, are you leading and equipping them, or are you controlling them? And it also goes to how we play as well. I tell them all the time, like, I can chess piece you all day long if you want. You go here, then you go here, then you pass here, then you go here. That's not how you want it. You want to be able to make decisions on the floor. You want to be able to play basketball. And the better you do at that, the more freedom I can give you. It's kind of like parenting. If you take too much of that and you're not doing well with it, then I got to reel that back. And then I got to chess piece you a little bit. And so, leading and equipping, much more important than controlling in my case. And now I've been doing it for a long time, so it's a lot easier for me to let some of that control go.
Yeah, and I think that's something that only really comes from experience. I think that's something that is really, really hard to do when you're early in your career, or even early as a parent. You think about how you parent your first child versus how you parent your second or third. And, that first kid, you're just like, you're staring at them 24 hours a day and trying to make sure that they get every single thing that they need. And then if you're like me, by the time you get to the third one, you're a lot more hands off and a lot more, hey, you got a decision to make here. And I'm going to try to guide you to make the right decision. But ultimately, you're going to have a little bit more freedom than your older sister or your older brother had, because, again, you just realize that when you, as you said, equip them to make those decisions, ultimately you're helping them to grow at a much faster rate than you do when you're controlling every single thing that happens out on the basketball floor, or every single thing that happens in your kid's life as a parent. All right, Rob, before we get out of here, is there anything else that we didn't touch on tonight that you think is relevant to the conversation that we've had, kind of just going through some different things that you face and that you get to enjoy as a high school coach? Any final thoughts, comments, ideas that we haven't touched on before we wrap up?
Hey, I'm just grateful for, to learn from people like you. I'm grateful for all the people that have helped me, and I'm available to anybody, you'd be shocked how many people call and just say, hey, coach, what's up with this? What do you think about this? I'm a new coach, like the coach I referenced from Dallas who called me last week, and he's a second-year coach, and, it just picked my brain. So I'm just grateful for people that help me, and I'm always willing to help, others. And so, if you ever need anything, and that's for anybody out there relative to basketball or just life in general, don't hesitate to call. And I'm thankful for you guys for having me on and blessing me to be the 23rd, be on here twice. And so I'm honored. I'm sure there's guys much more qualified and more uniquely, knowledgeable than I am. So, I'm just grateful to Mike, you and Jason for having me on. And I'm grateful to all the coaches that helped me, especially during this Corona year. I was able to get on Zooms and be able to, talk to people that, in a weird way, I would never be able to talk to had this Corona thing not happened. So, it's really been valuable in that way. I would never want to go through it again or, have to replicate it. But I think we did make the most of it from a basketball standpoint and from a growth standpoint, as from a human being standpoint. And so I'm just grateful to everybody out there for listening and for you guys for having me on.
Well, your humility speaks for itself. And I think that one of the things that we found, and I think that it comes across really strongly when you talk about the podcast, is we've been able to learn from coaches and media members and players that everybody has heard of across the country. And then we've been able to learn equally from coaches that nobody has heard of, except for maybe some people in their local area.
Sure.
And I think that's really the key to growing as a human being, as a coach, as a person, is the ability to learn from everybody and understanding that it's not just the big names. It's not just the people It could be anybody can give you something that can help you to improve as a coach, as a person, as a player. So that being said, share how people can reach out to you who do want to do that. Whatever contact information, social media you want to share, please do that. And then I'll jump back in and wrap it up.
Absolutely. And feel free to use any of these avenues to get me. And I know people say I'm crazy when I go to clinics and give out my cell phone number, but here's my cell phone number. I don't care. You can call me anytime. I'm going to trust that it's not going to end up in some restroom, I-80 corridor or something like that. But anyway.
8675309.
Right. Yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. But at any rate, my cell phone number is 630-965-9813. My personal email at home is Raiders, Raiders, HOOPS. So Raiders Hoops, all one word, at Comcast.net. And my Twitter handle is at Brook Hoops. At Brook Hoops stands for Bolingbrook Hoops. So at Brook Hoops is my Twitter handle. And, I'm not really into IG and some of those other Snap and all of those other forms. I have a young assistant who does all that stuff. So those are the best ways.
Come on, you have a TikTok account, Rob. Come on. Come on. You're making those TikTok dances. I know you are.
I mean, I wish I was better at making TikToks because, I have to ask my daughter, who's a sophomore, and my son, who's in 7th grade, about TikTok and some other platforms as well. So, who knows? Hopefully, maybe someday I'll make some TikToks.
and by then it'll be something else. It'll be on there. You'll still be an old guy. Dad, you're still on TikTok. Yes, what are you doing?
Both my kids call me a boomer all the time. I'm not even sure what it means, but whatever that is, I guess I'm that.
Yeah, let's claim that. We'll claim it for posterity. So
that's right.
At any rate, Rob, cannot thank you enough for jumping on with us tonight and being number 23 in our parade of double guests. So thank you for that. As always, you provide a ton of value to coaches out there. And I would highly recommend that if you're interested in learning how to play fast, if you're interested in the profession of coaching, there's probably no better source than Rob to be able to talk high school basketball. And if you've stuck with us through this entire episode, you just see how well-versed he is in a variety of topics related to coaching at the high school level and recruiting and all the different things that we touched on tonight. So Rob, again, thank you. Really appreciate it. And to everyone out there, we will catch you on our next episode. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Hoop Heads podcast, presented by Head Start Basketball.